Good morning and welcome to Shattering Myths. This program is devoted to the most vital segment of our society. To those of you like me who know that there's something dreadfully wrong with the political and religious institutions which govern and control, in many ways influence our nation, who recognize the considerable malfeasance inherent in the media, the military, and also with regard to economic influences. We realize that these institutions, all of them, are the problem, and therefore they are not the solution. So instead of trying to rearrange the deck chairs on our sinking ship of state, our mission is to scour the news, looking behind the headlines, so that we know who is causing the tragedies that are besieging our planet, and so that we come to understand why they are doing so, all while predicting how their ill-advised and inappropriate plans will influence our world over the next 10 and 15 years. At the very most, based upon the plague of adverse political, religious, military, and economic influences, at the very most, we have only 15 to 20 years left until all hell breaks loose. A complete economic collapse, world war, unrelenting propaganda, and killings that will number in the billions rather than the hundreds of thousands or even tens of millions. Therefore, in our second hour, we're going to engage God on his terms through evidence and reason, since he not only predicted all of this, but also since his guidance regarding his covenant provides the only escape from what will become planet hell. Our phone number, if you'd like to participate in this discussion of a lifetime, it's toll-free. We encourage you to call. The number is 877-300-7645. Yesterday we talked a little about the presentation that we heard during the SRN news of Britain issuing an Islamic bond. What I have subsequently learned is that the bond is called an Islamic bond, is not issued by any Islamic country. It is in fact the UK begging for money. Prime Minister Cameron, who I consider, based upon his comments, to be one of the most dangerous and disingenuous people on earth. And he is a conservative, for those of you who think conservatism is good and liberalism is bad. He is a conservative in the UK, and his rhetoric is stunningly ignorant, irrational, immoral. Anyway, Prime Minister Cameron was the spokesperson, calling it brave, calling it courageous for the UK to issue a Islamic bond. He said specifically that this bond was Sharia compliant. Now, Sharia is the most undemocratic, the most savage, the most uncivilized political, religious, and economic system ever conceived by humankind. It is an abomination by any rational, moral, or economic criterion that would be considered reasonable. It is based entirely on the words and deeds of Muhammad, and Muhammad's economy was based exclusively on terrorism. Through terrorism, he was able to engage in the slave trade, and kidnap for ransom, in grand larceny, armed robbery. And that is how Islam was financed, exclusively. There is no other source of income in the Islamic economy during the time of Muhammad, and Sharia law is based entirely on Muhammad. Now, we talked about the fact that an Islamic bond would have to bear no interest for it to be Sharia compliant. And the reason that interest is banned in Islam and no other civilized culture on earth is because the Muslims initially were not very good terrorists. They were lousy terrorists. Their first attempts at terrorism were horrendous. Their goal was initially to rob caravans, to rob productive businessmen. And they failed at it. And because they were so bad at it, the small group of Muslims that retreated from Mecca to Yathrib, today's Medina, in shame following the satanic verses, lived off the charity of the Jews. They borrowed money from the Jews and then didn't pay it back. And because the Jews had loaned them money and had charged them a modicum of interest for that money, they justified killing their benefactors, murdering them, raping their wives, killing their sons, enslaving their children, for the express purpose or the express reason that they charged interest on their loans. So in Islam, to justify mass murder and enslavement and rape, there is no interest. And so it was the Prime Minister, Cameron himself, that was touting these Sharia-compliant bonds, encouraging Islamic fiefdoms, Islamic warlords, Islamic OPECers to give Great Britain their money. He also instituted and was proud of his Islamic Stock Index, saying that it was a brave and bold, courageous move that would track public companies whose business practices are Sharia compliant. Now, Sharia law is the thing that every terrorist in the world is trying to impose. Muslims are suicide bombers. Muslims are jihadists almost exclusively to impose Sharia. Sharia is the purpose, it's the motivation, it's the goal of virtually all Islamic terrorism, and Islamic terrorism represents 99% of all terrorist acts perpetrated in the world today. So I read in this particular article that was sent to me, I think it was from the BBC, on the Sharia-compliant bonds and the Sharia-compliant Islamic Stock Index. And the two comments that struck my eye, of the 5 or 6 that were under it, and every comment under it was written by a Muslim. This one reads, "Now will you accept Islamic rules to run the economy?" Another one written by a Muslim said, "Islamic principles must be used as a meaningful platform in order to have a healthy economy." There are 55 Islamic countries in the world. Those that are not fiefdoms based solely on OPEC gains are impoverished. In fact, that is the common thread amongst all Islamic countries, at least those that aren't personal estates that float on oil, is that they're economically devastated. Almost all of them. I mean, you look at Egypt, for example, which is the most populous of the Middle Eastern Muslim nations, and you recognize that the Egyptian economy was horrid prior to the Muslim Brotherhood being elected by the people. And during the time of the Muslim Brotherhood, when they attempted to impose Sharia, a devastatingly inept economy became completely broke. They were unable to feed their people. They were 100% dependent upon handouts from surrounding nations. Islam has never been able to promote a prosperous economy because for there to be economic prosperity, there must be trust. There must be a condition by which, if you're going to risk your capital, if you're going to risk your labor, that there must be some assurance that should you prevail, that you will be able to retain the benefits. Well, in a communist or Islamic society, those promises do not exist. And that is the reason why they are universally derelict, with the only exception being OPEC nations and personal fiefdoms like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and the like. This is really pathetic. Speaking of Islamic economic principles, Libya's state news agency says that gunmen stole $54 million in an attack on a van carrying foreign and local currency for a Libyan central bank. The men stopped the van as it entered the city of Sirte from the airport. The cash delivery had been flown 300 miles from the capital, Tripoli. So for the Libyan central bank, the cash, which was in foreign currency because in an Islamic country their own currency is useless, it had been flown from Tripoli to Sirte, and when it arrived, it was stolen. This quote, "The robbery is a catastrophe for the whole of Libya," Abdel Fattah Mohammed, the head of the Sirte Council, told Reuters. Libya has suffered continuing lawlessness, this report reads, since the 2011 civil war. All right, so with Islamic principles now guiding Libya, it has not only suffered continued lawlessness since the 2011 civil war, but also their central bank's funds are robbed. Libya's government has been struggling to keep control of a country full of armed militias, of gangs, and of radical Islamists, all one and the same. Except they aren't radical, they're fundamentalists. Reports on Monday suggested that only one security vehicle had been assigned to protect the van. That must be Islamic principles as to improperly plan to protect the foreign currency. Security guards were unable to resist the 10 attackers. Some 35 million Libyan dinars were also taken, which increased the amount stolen by $1.59. And there was also, amongst that amount, there was 12 million in U.S. dollars. Two banks in Sirte were hit by robbers in July, an official told the Associated Foreign Press. The attackers in that attack made off with 500,000 Libyan dinars. Sirte was the last bastion of support for Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, and the city, while it has largely been spared of the great wave of violence that has swept through the nation since then, the entire country of Libya has become a war zone, largely because the United States and Europe decided to bomb Muammar Gaddafi and aid and arm the jihadists. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. It is truly amazing that the United States bomb administration, Senator John McClown from Arizona, would promote the bombing of Muammar Gaddafi and the arming of the Mujahideen in Libya, and consider it a great triumph that these jihadists would now be in control of a country, making a bad situation infinitely worse in Libya. And now Libya is little more than a collection of armed jihadist militias, and the world's most significant clearing center for Qatari-supported weaponry for Islamic terrorism. It is a unmitigated mess that we have made there. Turning to another unmitigated mess, one that the United States played a major role in conceiving, the fugitive senior Muslim Brotherhood leader Assam el-Arian has been detained by the Egyptian authorities. Prosecutors ordered Mr. Arian's arrest in July after the military ousted President Mohamed Morsi. Now, mind you, the Muslim Brotherhood was, for the first time, allowed to participate in the political system. It had been banned under Mubarak. And so once they were allowed to participate in the system, they received, between them and the most fundamentalist Islamic party, almost 70% of the Egyptian vote, which is amazing since 10% of the population of Egypt is Coptic Christian, and of course they are vehemently opposed to the Muslim Brotherhood. And also about 10 to 15% of the population of Egypt has secular leanings. So that means that of those that don't have secular leanings and those who are not Coptic Christians, they received virtually 90+% of the potential vote. But anyway, they were ousted from power. They were ousted from power for lots of reasons, one of which is that Morsi didn't play nice with the military. One of the reasons in an Islamic country, you either have to have absolute control over the military, which Erdogan has done in Turkey, or they will have off with your head. Also, he fought the Supreme Court in Egypt because they did not sign up for his Sharia-based government. But nonetheless, they were the democratically elected government of that country. There's been a military coup, and then those driving the military coup are now rounding up and arresting, and they will have mock trials for those who were popularly elected. This is the nature of an attempt of democracy in an Islamic country. The majority of the people are illiterate. They are fundamentalist in their religion. They are told in the mosque who to vote for, and they are told that if they don't vote for the most Islamic of the candidates, that Allah will torture them in hell. And so they do. And this is the mess that it creates. So anyway, the state-run news agency in Egypt is now saying that Arian, the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood who has just been elected, can be expected to stand trial next week, along with Morsi and a dozen other officials. Yeah, I bet that'll be fair. At least two suburbs in Damascus, Yarmouk and Guetta, have been besieged by fighting between government forces and Islamic militias. I bring this up because the underpinning of Islam has always been war. And in Syria, all you have is Muslims fighting Muslims. There's no outside influence. It is strictly Muslims fighting Muslims. Now, some of the weapons for the Sunni Muslims are provided indirectly from the United States through Qatar and through Saudi Arabia to the rebels. And some of the weapons for the Assad regime are funneled via China or Russia. But nonetheless, the combatants are exclusively Muslims. The situation has become so desperate that Muslim clerics have been forced to produce religious edicts or fatwas, allowing people to eat cats, dogs, and donkeys just to survive. These animals are usually considered unfit for human consumption in Islam. They're not halal, which is, by the way, also the first name of Satan. It's Halal bin Shakar. For months, the UN and other aid agencies have been calling for urgent help, fearing the worst for the people of Mudhamia. And this comment from one of the people there said, "We haven't seen a piece of bread in 9 months. We are eating leaves and grass." I'm sure that is the result of Islamic economic principles at their best. Muslims fighting Muslims as they have for 1,300 years, creating starvation amongst this civilian population. We'll be back with Shattering Myths. Speaking of the results of Islamic economic interests and the Islamic economic influence over economies, we have 3 separate bombings today in Iraq. They've killed at least 20 people. The deadliest attack was north of Baghdad. 2 suicide bombers were killed, and they killed 11 others. Another suicide bomber drove his car into a checkpoint in the northern city of Mosul. I mean, just think, here's it. dozens of suicide bombings just in Iraq today. More than 1,000 people have been killed and 2,000 bodies have been wounded, mutilated, and just as they try to conclude the month of September. Many hundreds more, perhaps close to 1,000, have been killed in October. 70,000 people have been murdered by Islamic suicide bombers this year alone. Yeah, just think of just how stunningly maniacal her religion has to be for the religious leader, the imam, to tell a young man or a young woman that you are so pathetic that you're never going to have sex with a boy or girl. You're never going to get married. You're never going to be anything in your life, and that the only way that you have any chance of ever having sex, of being able to have anything positive, is to go fight in Allah's cause by strapping this bomb that we're going to make either to your body or drive a car with this bomb surrounding you. And you're going to win points with Allah, who is going to reward you with multiple virgins in paradise and rivers that flow with wine, so that you can have sexual conquests every day. That's going to be your reward for killing Muslim women and children. And you believe them. Then you do it. And that the imam the next day recruits someone else. And the day after that, someone else. And the imams across the country are doing the same thing day in and day out. And tens of thousands of people are being killed and hundreds of thousands are being mutilated. All by a religion. Yes, those are Islamic principles, Sharia, in action. This article says the violence is often fueled by sectarian divisions between Shia and Sunni Muslims. No, the violence isn't often fueled. It is only fueled. Yahowah told us some 3,500 years ago. The story takes place now 5,000, or I guess 4,000 years ago is when the story takes place, but it's recorded for our benefit 3,450 years ago. And speaking of Ishmael, whom Muslims claim through Muhammad is the founder, the forefather of patriarch of Islam. Speaking of his descendants, and therefore today's Muslims, Yahowah said they will be wild asses of men. Their hands will be raised against their brother's hands will be raised against them, and they will live in hostility with the whole world. Muslims have been killing Muslims for all 1,400 years that Islam has existed. As a matter of fact, Muslims kill many more Muslims than do non-Muslims kill Muslims. It's probably 100 to 1. In favor of Muslims murdering their fellow Muslims. It is all fueled by sectarian divisions, Sharia-based, whether it be Shia or Sunni Muslims. Now, they said that much of it is blamed on al-Qaeda in this story. Oh, that's a lie. It's not based on al-Qaeda. There is no one who is committing a terrorist act who is being motivated to become a suicide bomber based upon the words and deeds or example of Osama bin Laden. Not one. There isn't a single imam anywhere in the world that is recruiting a suicide bomber to go out and murder Muslims based upon the testimony or the faith or anything associated with bin Laden. 100% of it is based upon Islam as Muhammad conceived it, period. There isn't, not one suicide bomber has ever been motivated by al-Qaeda. When the 19 suicide bombers flew planes into America's buildings on 9/11 and killed 3,000 innocent people, they left behind video diaries where they quoted the Quran. They did not say that as they were flying those planes into our buildings, Osama Akbar, They did not say, Al-Qaeda Akbar, Osama is greater, Al-Qaeda is greatest, not one of them. They shouted, Allahu Akbar. Allah is exclusively the name of the Islamic God. That is the reality. Any association with Al-Qaeda is a myth, very much like man-made global warming. Since 2013, there have been just 16 days where there were no murders from suicide bombers in Iraq. Isn't that amazing? Since 2013, just 16 days. We, as Americans, invaded Iraq, deposed a secular dictator, and made a bad situation infinitely worse. It was one of the low points in American history. Hi, Larry. Welcome to Shattering Myths. How are you today?
I'm good. Yahowah. How are you?
I'm saddened by all of the onslaught of Islamic malfeasance. I would like to start on an article that was published by CNN. Its dateline is Washington. It's a study of terrorism, Larry, and its findings are quite revealing. You'd like to hear a little bit about what CNN has to say about this? It says, as terrorism increasingly becomes a tactic of warfare, the number of attacks, by the way, terrorism increasingly becomes a tactic of warfare. The introductory line there is a misstatement. Terrorism was never more a aspect of warfare than it was in World War II, where the United States was the principal terrorist nation of the world. Terrorism was what was used to bring America's Civil War to a close, with Sherman's March to the Sea, and with America firebombing German and Japanese cities, and then using the ultimate terrorist weapon, which was a nuclear bomb, on 2 Japanese cities. Terrorism was a tactic of warfare. Today, terrorism really isn't a tactic of warfare because there's not a single nation that has declared war. Nations haven't declared war. Terrorism is not a tactic of warfare. It's a tactic of Islam, a religion. So the opening statement is false. The number of attacks and fatalities soared to a record high in 2012, according to a new report obtained exclusively by CNN. More than 8,500 terrorist attacks killed nearly 15,500 people last year as violence tore through Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, according to the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism. Now, to say that 8,500 terrorist attacks killed nearly 15,500 people last year is to say that whatever model they are using does not consider what is occurring in Islamic nations where there is no one to report the news. Because, for example, close to 30,000 and maybe as many as 50,000 Syrians were killed last year as a direct result of terrorist attacks. And Iraq last year was about 10,000 people that were killed as a direct result of Islamic terrorist attacks. In Somalia and the Sudan, the numbers are lower because the population is lower, but about 1,000 people in each of those 2 countries were killed by terrorist attack. To say that 15,500 people last year were killed by terrorist attack is to say we haven't got a clue what's happening in countries where there is no independent journalism. And we will find that to be the case here in just a moment. Now, they claim
I don't know that we have independent journalists anymore at all. I mean, unless they're in places like this show.
Well, that's probably true, but
not on any mainstream. There isn't.
Yes, but there's a difference. Yeah,
people.
And I recognize that what you've said here is true. But what I'm speaking of here is that In Syria, for example, there are now 0 embedded journalists because you can't trust either side. In Iraq now, there are essentially no Western journalists. It's too deadly. In Egypt now, there's very few Western journalists because those that have been there either been raped or killed.
Right, but they're saying, 15,000 people died due to terrorist attacks
last year. Uh-huh.
I'm sure.
In a month, perhaps.
You're saying 1,000 on each side in Sudan. I'm sure it's higher than that. I mean,
yes.
The whole thing with the Junjaweed, it's all about. It used to be to kill the Christians. Now it's killing the other Muslims because their original language wasn't Arabic. And this Junjaweed, they come flying into any little village they can and kill everybody.
Yeah, you're talking about the Darfur region of the Sudan, where the Arabic fundamentalist Islamic leadership in the Sudan over the past 25 years has killed 3 million civilians.
It's hard to imagine that they didn't. They did so poorly last year. I don't believe that.
Yeah, they go from 3 million over 25 years to their total would be less than 1,000 of the 15,500 last year. Yeah, they would really be off their game, wouldn't they?
Let's do the math on that.
Yeah.
I mean that doesn't add up.
No.
Because if you're killing 3 million, that's 150,000 a year. Well, I would look at this 15,000 dead as a win. I mean that's like a record.
Yeah. But that's according to the National Consortium. Your U.S. taxpayer dollars are paying for this. The National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism said that was a 69% increase in the number of attacks and an 89% jump in the number of fatalities from 2011. So we'll return to those numbers, their criterion, their definitions when Shattering Myths continues after the commercial break. Considering a report that your U.S. taxpayer dollars are paying for, it's from the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responsive to Terrorism. They claim that the number of fatalities from terrorist attacks was 15,500 people last year in 2012, and that was an 89% jump from the number of fatalities in 2011. Now, that number is absurdly low compared to the actual number that are killed by Islamic terrorists in any given year. For example, if it's an 89% jump from 2011, that would mean that about 8,000 people were killed by terrorists in 2011. And if you look at the Syrian war during that period of time, where about 90% of the fatalities are terrorists. They are attacks by armed men on armed civilians, textbook terrorism. You'd have about 5,000 deaths from terrorist attack just in Syria each month. And they're claiming that there have been 8,000 deaths from terrorist attack all of 2011. It's amazing that A, the U.S. government is paying for this, and B, that you've got PhDs managing this. 6 of the 7 most deadly groups are affiliated with al-Qaeda, is their conclusion, so they're wrong there again. According to START, which is the study, let's see, well, they call themselves the National Consortium for the Study, I guess the START would be Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism, so START was a clever acronym for them. Most of the violence was affiliated with al-Qaeda. And what's amazing here is that America has killed virtually every known person associated with al-Qaeda, including the founder of al-Qaeda. That's if you don't consider Zbigniew Brzezinski and the CIA, the founder of al-Qaeda. You would then go to Osama.
They got Carter and Brzezinski, did they?
Yeah, they didn't get Carter. Yeah, they didn't get Carter and Brzezinski. But killed Osama bin Laden. Found out that Osama bin Laden was holed up in a house just a stone's throw from the Pakistani military academy, and that he was completely isolated. That he didn't have anybody he was influencing.
Yeah, well,
Nothing.
SEAL 6, they're all dead now, but the guys that supposedly did that mission, but if they attacked bin Laden, in my opinion, they must have attacked a mortuary or a graveyard, because he was dead before that. Had advanced Marfan syndrome. You and I would probably disagree on this, but
I'm
buying that.
Yeah,
I'm not buying that all the SEALs died and then the SEAL commander killed himself in a suicide rage or whatever. No, I'm not buying it. And by the way, their families aren't buying it anymore. So
whether or not Osama bin Laden was still alive there in his little hovel, the only thing that matters from my perspective is actually that two things regarding this, and as it relates to this story, the principal issue is that the leadership of al-Qaeda has had no influence on anyone anywhere around the world now for better part of 5 or 6 years. And during the time that al-Qaeda has had no influence on anyone anywhere around the world for 5 or 6 years of any material manner, the rise in terrorism, fatalities from Islamic terrorism have skyrocketed. So if the purpose of the war against al-Qaeda was to diminish terrorism, and it's akin to the war on terrorism, then I can tell you the more al-Qaeda members that are killed, the faster terrorism grows. So we aren't fighting that war very smartly. And also that we have absolute proof that al-Qaeda did not influence any terrorist group during the past 5 or 6 years. So those are really my issues as to when bin Laden was killed. I don't know. I do know that the U.S. government had no interest in trying him. They had no interest in justice. They, whether or not he died before, or they wanted him dead, or they just wanted to claim a great victory for having him dead, I can't tell you what the answers to those are, but your conspiracy theories there may well hold water.
It did look pretty scripted to me. I remember they had, what's his name, the great real estate mogul, jump out, and right in the middle of his show, when he was in the middle of this major fight with Obama, that's when they announced it. I thought it was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, we will return to Shattering Myths, actually turning the page and looking to the Torah. We will continue with this report from START regarding the radical increase in killings from Islamic terrorists and their report on this matter.